Hello, everyone. This is Charles Walter Buntjer coming from San Francisco. It's 2025. I just celebrated my 85th birthday this February in Iceland, of all places. Last year, Australia. My 80th birthday was in Dubai, Oman, India, and Sri Lanka. Who would have guessed it? Now, on with my story about my father, Walter Buntjer, and his escapades on saving a train. First, I want to do a little bit overview about what it was like living on a farm in Illinois in the 40s. Here is a picture of me in my first grade class. I'm in the bottom center of the photo. This was the Wagner one-room school. Now, we were living on a 500-acre farm about 10 miles away from Pecatonica, Illinois. It was interesting. The farm had two large hills on it. On the one hill, we had the house and the barn and the other buildings by the gravel road that went to Pecatonica. About 3/4 of a mile away was another very high hill, and on top of it was an Indian mound and lots of oak trees and everything. Between the two hills was a valley, and the valley went over into hundreds of acres of tillable land. Along the edge of the farm was a railroad that ran through. Usually the train went through once every couple of weeks. It was a freight train. It may have gone at night because it seems like it would have gone more than once in 2 or 3 weeks, but who knows? And beside that was the river. And the river was interesting because in the spring, when the thaw came by and the rains, it would flood. But this year, around 1948, I think, we had horrendous rainstorms and lots of snow, and the river overflowed and covered the entire lower area of the farm with all this rich black soil. So when we planted the corn, you could almost hear it growing. Now, a little bit about what our life was like. We would, on the weekends, I guess Sundays probably, was one day we did a little extra time off. Usually we're working 12-hour days and sometimes 14-hour days. But Sunday, we would do the chores and then have a nice dinner. And when the weather was nice, we'd sit on the porch and listen to the radio. Now, it was interesting. The radio on Sunday nights was really fun for us. The announcer would come on, and the first thing he would say, because we loved detective shows, was, "The Shadow knows." Ooh, what does the Shadow know? Who stole the jewels? Where are they hidden? Is he going to find them? Will he solve the case? So we loved those detective shows, and sometimes the announcer would come on afterwards, and there would be, well, a different announcer, and he would say, "Direct from New York." He said, from one of the top hotels on the top floor of the Conga room. And one of the top bands would be playing there with someone like a famous singer. I'm trying to think of somebody who it might have been, Peggy Lee, and her favorite songs. So I'd be sitting there thinking, why am I on the farm? I should be in New York City. Why wasn't I born there? Why aren't I able to go to these nightclubs and hear these singers and see the city and all that stuff? Isn't it funny? The other thing we did was once every couple of weeks we'd go in Saturday night to the grocery store, and then we go to the Five and Dime, and I might have a quarter or something so I could buy a magazine or a comic or something. And maybe every month or so we'd go to a movie. And of course, at that time, movies were interesting because many times in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, they took place on a train. And the trains were fantastic. A sleeping car, a dining car. Some of the cars had these observation domes on the top of them. And then, of course, the last car was this cocktail lounge. And I always thought, someday maybe I'll be able to ride on one of those trains. But I doubt it. So, what happens one evening in the spring after all these huge floods that had taken place? We finished listening to the radio, and it was after 9 o'clock, and it was very dark out, and we were thinking about going to bed because we had to get up early Monday morning and start off working all those 12-hour days. And suddenly, we heard this noise. It was a horn, like it made this long, long sound, like two of them. And then it was quiet and it echoed all over. And we said, "What is going on?" Well, a few minutes later, we heard the same thing again, honk, honk. What is it? We were all in a dither. So we got up and looked out into the valley, and there on the tracks was a train. It was unbelievable, like 12 cars, and they were all lit up. All the windows were bright as could be, and the engine was lit up, and there was a huge light on the front of it um, that went hundreds of feet down the railroad. What is going on? It would go a couple of feet and stop and honk the horn, and then a couple of feet, and then it just sat there. So my father says, "I'm going to go down and see what's going on." "What do you mean you're going to go down? You're going to take the horse and ride down there, and that engine and that whistle and the engine making all that noise, and you're going to take the horse down there? What if the horse gets scared and throws you?" "Not to worry," my father said, and off he rode. Well, he was gone for half an hour and a half, and we really got worried. But as we were watching, we saw the train start to inch forward a little bit, a foot or two, and then another foot. And after about an hour, it disappeared behind a hill. Well, we figured it must be continuing on its way, and then my father rode back up to the house, and he said, "Wow," he said, "you should have seen. I went on the middle of the track and waved at the engineer, and he leaned out of the cab of the engine, and he said we had to be routed around these tracks because he said outside of Rockford, all the tracks have been washed away from the flood. But he said I didn't realize there was water all around the tracks here also." My father told him that not to worry, that the tracks were probably all right, but what he'd do is he'd go 100 or 200 feet in front of the train, and he'd slowly walk the horse along and check all the tracks, make sure they were safe, and the train could follow him. So they went a mile or so, and then my father told him, "Well, we're out of the flood plains area, and everything looks good, so you're good to go." And the engineer thanked him so much, and he said, "This is the California Zephyr, and it's going from Chicago to San Francisco, actually Oakland, and then people were going to take the ferry over to San Francisco." And my father says, "Wow, you got to be kidding me." And he said, "Nope." And he said, "Tomorrow night, probably around the same time, you'll see another train like this one coming, but it's I'm not sure if it was the Southern Chief, but that's the one that's going to Los Angeles." So my father told us all these stories about the train and how he saved it and on and on. And were we impressed? What a story. Wow. Now, I do have to add, it was interesting in a sense. When I heard that the train was going to San Francisco and another one was going to Los Angeles, I thought, oh, well, that might be just as good a place to go to someday, along with New York and Chicago. Little did I know, 17 years later, I would be living in San Francisco. I was drafted in 1963, and because I'd been in the tech industry for about 4 years already, I was sent to San Francisco. I got off the plane, I kissed the ground, and said, "I'm never leaving California." A year later, I ended up visiting in Los Angeles. My friend in the picture here on the left is John. He was in the computer business with me at the Presidio, and we worked 5 days a week. And can you believe it, in, in the Army, we had the weekend off. So after work on Friday, we'd get dressed up in a suit and we'd get on the plane and fly to LA and visit his wife and his mother. His mother was a piece of work. She had a house by the beach and was Jewish, and she had these 5-inch heels on and a leopard skin patterned slacks and blouse, and was just hysterical. And she'd lounge on a chaise lounge, and I'd think, "You're not in Kansas anymore, Chuck. You're in LA." So it was just wonderful. Now, even more interesting, which you'll find, I think, is that when John and I would fly back Sunday evening, we'd take the bus downtown from the airport to get off at Powell and Market, and we'd get on the cable car and go to the top of Nob Hill, and then we'd go into the Mark Hopkins, and on the top floor was this just wonderful cocktail lounge that looked like the 1930s that you see in a movie. And we have our suits on, and we'd go up there, and we had a table we liked, and because we went there every weekend if we could, and we sat there with our cocktails looking out over the city, and we were of course still smoking, and we had Dunhill cigarettes, which came in a red case with gold trimming, very exclusive. So we'd sit there with our cocktails and our cigarettes and look over the city and thought we were very sophisticated. But isn't it interesting? Only a little over 15 years before, I was on the farm thinking, someday if I'm lucky, I might be in New York or San Francisco. And guess what? Not only was I in San Francisco, I ended up going to LA, to Vegas, to Reno, you name it, and then traveling all over the world. So I hope you enjoyed this story about growing up on the farm, and my father, of course, being able to save the train, and I think it's just a wonderful story. So, cheers. Click on like and subscribe to my channel at Charles Buntjer 593. You take care. Bye-bye.